At more than 30 locations in New Mexico, bird watchers participate in the Audubon Christmas Bird Count.
I've worked with a lot of groups over my time as a guide and educator, and I sometimes ask, if you had a superpower, what would it be? And very often that superpower is the power of flight. They're also messengers. Birds come and birds go. They tell us when the seasons are changing. They tell us when to get ready for spring. They tell us when to get ready for winter, and I really like that. I really appreciate being able to look outside and have this other organism, tell me something about what's to come in my life.
We have the Audubon Society Christmas Bird Count. Can you tell us a little bit about what it means to be a citizen scientist?
Over a century now, Audubon has been encouraging members of the community who may not be, classically trained biologists or ornithologists to go out and pay attention to what's around them. And so what happens is, in particular with the Christmas bird count, you have these circles that get formed throughout the country. There are thousands of these circles, I think around 2,000 circles in the United States, about 15 miles wide, and you just count as many birds as you can within that circle within a 24-hour period. In order to understand our world, we have to make a lot of observations. And obviously there aren't necessarily enough researchers to make all of those observations. So some of the folks who are doing some of this bigger science with this big data that's being gathered by citizens rely on people on the ground like you and me to be, especially now in our digital age, to be uploading our observations to some of these platforms online and things like that. So then they can sort of crowdsource that information and start to understand trends. So if it weren't for the citizen or the individual, the community participant that is making these individual observations, there wouldn't be a story to tell about this information. There wouldn't be sort of a trend that you can see in the world.
And what are the trends?
It depends on what scale you're looking at. If you're looking at the course of 117 years, the trends aren't necessarily looking so good. So some of the data from the Christmas bird count has been used in the 2014 Audubon Climate Report. In grasslands, you see a 40% decline in the last 50 years or so. But at the same time, you have year-to-year differences. And so you get to understand these individual population trends in addition to broader trends as sort of birds as a whole are responding to a changing climate.
Talk a little bit about the flyway in New Mexico.
New Mexico is an incredible place for birds, and part of what makes it so special is that obviously we're surrounded by desert, but we have these beautiful ribbons of water. We have the Rio Grande, we have the Gila River, we have these really incredible, rich resources where the birds concentrate, and they're dynamic systems by nature. Because we live in an arid environment, there's a lot of the time in the year where it's not raining. And when it does rain and when we do have the snowmelt, that changes the course of rivers, that changes the morphology of the rivers, and that creates these really diverse habitats. So the Gila River is a place where we have some of the most diverse bird breeding in the country. There are over 200 species of birds that can be found along the Gila because it is a wild river, it is a free-flowing river. So New Mexico is an important part of that story because we have these natural systems still in place and we have these ribbons of life.
Can you give us a story about one of the birds, particularly a trend of a particular bird in New Mexico?
There are sort of two different groups of birds that we can key into. So there are wintering birds, like the sandhill cranes. So the sandhill cranes, particularly in New Mexico, there are about 18,000 of these birds, and they breed up in Idaho. Gray Lake, Idaho is where they breed, and then they come down here every winter to inhabit the bosque habitats. But then on the other end, you have birds that are arriving here from southern latitudes, from Central and South America, from Mexico, and they're coming up here to breed. So that includes like the southwestern willow flycatcher. And that's a bird that is sort of emblematic of New Mexico. That's an endangered subspecies of flycatcher, but we have incredible amounts of breeding density here in New Mexico, again, because we have these ribbons of life, because we have these rivers that really sustain the habitat that these birds need.
What can we learn? What can birds teach us?
Birds indicate sort of the health of a system, so the diversity of birds that you might be seeing in a place could tell you how healthy that ecosystem is. So for instance, the yellow-billed cuckoo, the Bell's vireo, those are what sort of in technical terms you would say they're riparian associates. So they live near rivers and streams. And if you have those birds, then you can probably guess that there is some level of activity, natural activity that's happening, natural stream flow that's going on, that probably indicates that other animals are existing there, that it's a healthy system. But I think birds can also tell us beyond just about sort of natural habitats and natural systems. They can tell us about ourselves. And I think, you know, birds are really incredible messengers in our lives. They tell us, as I mentioned before, about the changing seasons. Mm-hmm. They can tell us about ourselves in terms of culture and how we respond to birds.
So the birds can maybe even teach us how to be better humans. And some birds actually exemplify the Christmas spirit.
There are many birds that give gifts, but our own state bird, the greater roadrunner, during breeding times, they'll actually give gifts to potential mates. They'll bring a blade of grass. They'll bring a stick to their potential mate. Yeah, exactly. So there are these incredible behaviors, or maybe the sandhill cranes, when they're breeding, they do these beautiful, elaborate dances. And I feel like that's a gift that we can give to each other, the gift of performance, or in the springtime when they're singing to each other, like the yellow warbler. Sometimes what I appreciate about birdsong is a lot of birders do this as well, but give mnemonic devices to what they're saying to help remember. So the yellow warbler, which also lives in our bosque habitats, it'll say, "Sweet, sweet, I'm so sweet, sweet." And so I always feel like that's a gift too, when I'm out there and just being able to see some of these birds and appreciate their life history and their complexity and their ability to survive.
What can we learn by being a citizen scientist?
That sort of speaks to another phrase people are using around citizen science, which is community science. It can teach us how to appreciate each other, how to get along. The Christmas bird count wouldn't work if you didn't have 60,000 people going out and counting in the United States, 70,000 people going out and counting throughout the Western Hemisphere. And so it teaches us how we can better understand one another, communicate with one another. I love going birding by myself, but I love going birding with other people because I love sharing with them. I love teaching them. The Christmas bird count is a great opportunity for perhaps somebody who's interested in birds but doesn't feel like they're an expert to team up with some experts and learn a little bit about birds. So I think it teaches us how to appreciate one another, appreciate the time that we have together, and appreciate our abilities as individuals. I may have knowledge that you do not have, and you might have some that I don't have. So let's get together, let's go birding. Let's learn a little bit.